Hello everyone, I'm Varun Khullar. I'm a former civil servant from the Ministry of Defense, and Imprint IS is a venture by working and former civil servants to guide future civil servants. So what we will be doing today, we'll be looking into the first topic of the SGS 2018 paper, right, for UPSC. And the first topic is alternative technologies for climate change resilient India, right? So what's the idea behind this video, right? So the video is to give a broad guideline about the essay which was asked recently in UPSC mains, and this video will be an illustration on how typically you can proceed, to help you write the essay, to help you correct your essay. In case you have written it already, you can have a look at that video and maybe correct it, and it will also give you some new ideas in case you might have missed a few things, right? So keep in mind, right? So whenever you read an essay's topic, you should actually segregate the three things. So in this topic, right, the topic has three keywords: alternative technologies, climate change, and resilient India, right? So first of all, let's try to understand what is an alternate technology. So it is a term used to refer technologies that are more environmentally friendly than the functional equivalent technologies dominant in current practice. Now, for that, don't think big, think small, right? That would be my suggestion when you're talking about an essay. So let's say you have gone to PBR and you order a Coke. These days, you will get a paper straw instead of plastic straw. So that is a environmentally friendly technology than using the equivalent plastic technology, which is the dominant one, right? In the same way, you can talk about coal being replaced by solar, etc. But the idea is that there are a lot of alternate technologies these days, right? Then what is climate change? So climate change is seen as the statistical distribution of weather pattern, and detailed discussion about climate change and agriculture is there in chapter 6 of UPSC, right? Of the economic survey. And what do you mean by resilient India? So we want in India to be strong enough to deal with the shock change of climate change. And that is the idea, right? So typically that is the crux of the three steps I would like to go into, right? So how do you start this essay? So there are different methods of starting an essay. A very useful one is using a short story. So the fictional story about any alternative technology which is being used, for example, a farmer which used GM crops or a drought-resistant crop seeds, which is related to climate change, or for using a new technology like intensification of agriculture or zero tillage. Right? Take an example from Punjab that before a farmer was not using zero tillage, and after he was using, he got a growth rate of maybe 20-30% over the previous crop. Production. The second would be a real example. Start with how India has an environmental, tropical climate which necessitates the use of air conditioning, as high temperature will reduce labor productivity. Now, example for that is that you need air conditioning, so a centralized air conditioning through underground pipes for cooling has been employed in Gujarat, Tin City. So this would be a very good example. Right? The other method is obviously to start with a quote. Okay, you can start with a quote which talks about mitigation of climate change is essential. Take the example of Rachel Carson, right, in The Silent Spring. She says, "We stand now where two roads diverge. But unlike the roads in Robert Frost's familiar poem, they are not equally fair. The road we have long been traveling is deceptively easy, a smooth superhighway on which we progress with great speed. But at its ends lies disaster. The other fork of the road, the one less traveled by, offers our last and only chance to reach a destination that assures the preservation of the earth." Now you can expand this, and you can talk about, elaborate this quote, that the road less traveled is the use of alternate technology. Okay, and then you can start with the alternate technologies. We'll be listing down a few, right, in the next few slides. Now, obviously, if you want to elaborate on climate change in one of the paragraphs, I should give you some data. So typically chapter 6, I will suggest that in the economic survey of volume 1, chapter 6, right, it does talk about how, what is climate change, right? So idea is that there's a trend of rising temperatures, declining precipitation, and extreme precipitation events. Okay, so and it talks about the fact that places which are not irrigated in India are the ones will suffer more, and their crop production will go down 20 to 25%, right, on an average, right, and even in areas where it's just irrigated, it will be 15 to 18%. And so it suggests the use of sprinkler and drip irrigation. That is the more proper drop solution to this problem. Okay. Uh, it does also talk about how temperature variation also has happened, the survey. It talks about how there is less rainfall in UP, Bihar, in Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, and also in Kerala and the Northeast than before. It talks about that there's increase in temperature in Uttarakhand and Himachal. It talks about there's increase in temperature in Rajasthan, Gujarat, right, and Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra, right. So typically what we'll do, we would need some kind of heat wave management systems and in place. People will have to take care of while traveling outside, especially in the summers in the future, right? So we need new technologies for that itself. Then, just to have an idea of what are the irrigated areas. So, right, normally we have something like 44% of India that is irrigated. So we'll need technologies for river linking, and at the same time mitigating the environmental impact of, right, the irrigation. Now, climate change, if you want to give some data how it will impact, so extreme rainfall shocks will lead to kharif and in our irrigated areas going by around 14% down, and with the rabi with 8.6. So again, you can use this data to corroborate that yes, we need alternative technologies. Okay, then the idea would be, okay, so if you ask the question, okay, we need alternate technologies, what kind of technologies can we use? So you can start with the historical argument that historically, okay, we have always used technology, right? So embankments at some Indus Valley sites, traditional water conservation system at Jhalara, Bavli, Johar, etc., right? So again, you can talk about the historical ideas about alternative technologies, although there are not many, but still you can. You can talk about Vijayanagar Empire and Fatehpur Sikri, and Fatehpur Sikri had a lot of technology to make sure that water used to come to the, and there was artificial cooling of the palaces. The other angle, obviously, the standard angle is using the Marshall scale and using the Pestle approach. So, but the idea would be in what way you use the Pestle approach. So the idea is that because it's typically economic activities which are responsible for the environmental problems. So we start with the economic component and the alternative technologies. So that is the idea behind this. Okay. Though obviously, I would like you to go into the social aspect and the psychological impact. That because if you're changing the technology, the social acceptance of the technology also has to be there, right? So that is the key. So example, let's start with economic components and alternate technologies. So power generation. So how can you have, how can you solve the power problem? So one is we need to go to coal, right? From coal, I need to go to, let's say, solar. Okay, from coal, hydro, etc. I need to go to solar, right? Though hydro is obviously not that carbon, centric, but still they're environmentally cost. So I would like to go to solar or wind or geothermal. But one solution would be actually going towards nuclear and nuclear fission, and obviously because that also leads to some kind of radioactive waste. The best idea is obviously to go towards fusion, right? So in nuclear fusion, you basically combine deuterium, tritium, and at 150 million centigrade in a magnetized target fuel. fusion, and that is what Canadian company General Fusion does, right? So it produces zero gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and only helium is the exhaust, and maybe that can be used to fill up balloons for children, right? Okay, and it requires less land than other renewable technologies. So because solar and wind require a lot of land, and land is a very scarce commodity in India, so fusion is actually very, very safe, right? This is the reactor in case you haven't gone through this type of work, right? So these are the hydraulic pipes which are supposed to control the fusion reaction, right? Anyhow, scary looking thing. Climate smart infrastructure. A very interesting example is this storm water management and road tunnel project under the federal government in Malaysia, in which the top two pipes areas are for travel, right? So the top two levels carry road traffic, and the temporal, they can be used also as temporarily as stormwater drainage systems. So this is a very good idea and is expected to lower cost as well in the future. The other examples are the most latest ones is the hydrogen train in Germany. Now, this was built by Armstrong, and this is very recent in September, right? In case you might not even have gone through this. So this is a cheaper train, obviously. It's more expensive, right, to buy, but very cheap to run. So that's a very good idea as well. You can have this. Then obviously you can talk about electric cars, right? And obviously experimentally now so Tesla is actually having the Tesla X and the Tesla S. I think they should soon actually be encouraged in India as well. Environmentally friendly, and the Toyota's chairman Fuyuji Joe talks about the fact that environmentally friendly cars will soon cease to be an option and they'll become a necessity. Okay, and the main issue with this is obviously efficient batteries, and this will be solved soon by the University of Surrey, and you're going to give the example that they have discovered experimental materials which can solve this problem. So in the future, we can go towards electric way of transportation, definitely, right? The other examples obviously is biofuels. We can actually use less of ATF and more biofuels. So they're more, better source of fuel than the traditional ones. But obviously the issue is that they still will be producing carbon dioxide, right? Again, obviously we can use better material in our railways as well, and typically this is an example. Nilgiri mountain train gets a new look, and themed vinyl wrappings, reclining chairs, etc., right? So but the idea is that these things which the modernization which we are doing of railways, this needs to be right environment friendly, and that's not the case. So you need to talk about this angle as well, that despite the fact that we're looking for alternate technologies, typically the problem is that we may still be going towards the more easy path than the difficult path as mentioned in the quote before. Manufacturing, definitely carbon engineering is a very good idea, that they want to use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and produce fuel. You can go through the website in case you want to go into detail for this, right? So that's another solution for manufacturing. And manufacturing does obviously use the maximum number of carbon fuels, and typically is basically responsible for more than 30% of the emissions. The idea is agriculture. We require, obviously climate smart agriculture. We need to use trees along with crops, plant trees without crops, and we need to focus on a lot of things, right? So the idea is that we need to increase crop resilience by crop breeding and fungal symbiosis. We need to use laser leveling, and we need to reduce crop water demand and agriculture wastewater. Use agriculture wastewater. We need to strengthen adaptation to flooding, to floating agriculture, and we need to protect livestock from the impact of climate change to improvements in livestock feed and temperature regulations, etc. Now, examples obviously are use of drones to apply pesticides and fertilizers in a quick time, right? There are other examples of zero tillage and line sowing. Instead of broadcasting seeds, increase the yield by 15 to 15%. And zero tillage also decreases the diesel use. And that these zero tillage, residue management, and crop diversification can bring down fertilizer use, and indirectly obviously if there's less fertilizer use, then there's less natural gas use, and in time obviously you can argue for the fact that this is more environmentally friendly, and it led to a climate resilient India. The other ideas which can be is that what impact in various sectors would happen through climate change. So first is there would be increase in diseases and water and vector-borne disease. There would increase in malnutrition. There will be increased heat stress, and obviously we need to take care of this because this will lead to lower productivity in the future. Increase in respiratory illness and increase in injuries from extreme weather. Now these things have to be looked into, okay? And we need to find solutions to these 5 problems. And for these 5 problems, we need alternative. Whether you use AI, you use nanotechnology, you use big data analysis, right? All these things you can use, right? Obviously, you need to put a lot of money in more research into medicines, etc., right? Then obviously look into water resources. So how does climate change impact water resources? Number one, obviously, it will lead to less available water. So what do? Obviously, you can actually go for something like managing wastewater, and you treat the sewage water to meet industrial requirements. So this would be a very interesting example, and this is being done in Surat. Then coastal flooding, obviously, we need to make embankments and methods to how this doesn't happen. And then inland flooding, obviously, this is something that we have disaster management code for as well, and maybe you can mention that here. Damage from extreme events, how do you handle that? Salt water intrusion, so how do you change that? And then reduce water quality. Okay, so you need desalination, you need increased sustainable aquifer recharge, you need water treatment, right? So all those things you need to focus into. So how does that happen? Through obviously technology. Okay, then obviously we've already talked about stormwater. What are the solutions? Obviously cool roofs, right? And typically they will reduce the intense heat because cool roofs basically reflect more. Then biodegradable materials, right? For example, the best example is biodegradable paint, which mimics the old practice of creating paint from a milk-based recipe, and this is a company old-fashioned milk paint operated. This uses milk protein and lime and mineral pigments to create an organic paint mixture. So typically we need to use better materials for construction and better biodegradable materials. So that is the crux. Then we need to somehow go towards a zero energy building, and that is the only solution we have. Now the problem with that is obviously this would require a lot of cost, and India is still very, very cost sensitive. So always add this caveat that in a developing country, somehow the government has to subsidize these materials, the biodegradable materials, right? The less emittance materials, and obviously zero energy buildings. These have to be made available, have to be made accessible, and obviously affordable. So three A's I would say: accessible, affordable, and available. Right, these three things have to happen. Now, geothermal heating obviously again is a solution, right? Like power, wind, and solar, and it can be used than the coal, powered electricity, right? So that's another example I would say. Internet of Things, right, which can analyze data and run smart appliances when energy rates are lower. And though we don't have that like in India, we don't have actually a peak time and a high time for electricity rates, but I think that would be a good idea as well to implement, and there should be peak hours and there should be hours in which electricity would be cheaper, right? So that would be a very good idea, I would say, right? And Internet of Things is a very good idea for smart refrigerators, dishwashers. We already have five-star ratings of all our electrical appliances. I think what we should do is that the five-star rated fridge is expensive right now. It's expensive. Now the government needs to do something about it. We have some alternate theory of taxation somehow, right? We have the car, or if you want to buy a hybrid car, it's more expensive than the normal car. We somehow need to put tax at zero slab for hybrid cars, and same for the five-star. The highly efficient energy, thing needs to be sold more. Okay. Uh, Politically, right? Obviously, R&D expenditure needs to be increased. On the other hand, as I was already talked about, taxation has to be reduced. So taxation has to be made environmentally, right? So that would be one thing I would talk about. I would like to talk about. Then obviously, I would like to go into the various. If you want, you can even use all the missions from the National Action Plan on Climate Change, and you can talk about individually all of them, right? But I think we've already covered majority of them anyhow. In case, let's say you missed something, you can add them up. Okay. Now the other thing is social acceptance of technology is key. And you need to ask the government and the people, right? There has to be information education awareness campaign, right? There have to be runs for alternate technology, right, being used in various areas, right? Okay, finally, the conclusion. We've already talked about a lot of things, but the Greha rating system is something that I think we should definitely implement in all the parts of India, and every building should be Greha rated. All whether you pass a building, you should get a rating, and you should be charged more stamp duty in case you have a low rated, and that should be high enough so that the person actually feels like building the higher rated building. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana also should be typically any government building should be rated 5. So should be 5-star. That is what I would say. That should be a minimum. And all government buildings should use solar or some renewable energy. There should be zero energy buildings altogether. There should be no government building in India, whether state government or municipal or anything, that should not be zero rated. That would be a way of concluding. Then obviously, this will obviously lead for investment in alternative technologies. So one idea can be we can start an Indian alternate technology services. So this would subsume under the IES, right, where obviously these people would just be working on alternate technologies, and these cadre will actually really help in promotion as well as implementation of alternate technologies. Right, and lastly, obviously, immense contribution. India is still doing a lot. We have intended IDCs, which we have been actually implementing, and India has taken the major role in the ISA, the Solar Alliance, right? And we also have committed to reduction in our emissions, right? So typically, what you can end with a quote. On environment to give it a nice ending. And the quote can be obviously these two quotes. So there's sufficiency in the world for man's need, but not for man's greed. Then the other one is the earth, the air, the land, and the water are an inheritance and from our forefathers, but alone from our children. So we have to hand them at least what was handed over to us. So with these two, with those two quotes, I think we can actually end it. Okay. That's it for us. If you have any doubts, comments,